Welcome to Motocross the Golden Era channel. Today we're going to celebrate the birthday of Chad Trampas Parker. Now, Trampas Parker was not a household name in the motocross community in the United States from the late 80s to the late 90s, which is when the era in which he raced. But he was a big name over in the MXGPs. Today he's going to go into detail as to how he got discovered in the MXGPs, the road that he took to get there, and land his first factory ride in 1989 with the Chesterfield KTM team, and how it all evolved from that point. Trampas, at about 19 years old in 1987, decided to go over to Europe at an early age and settled in Italy, and did not have a ride, and ended up as a mechanic for one of the factory riders at the time. And while during his time off, he was at a national race in Italy and was discovered and by another mechanic. And this was in the end of like 1988, and his riding was so good that he secured a spot, even though their factory team was already full. The 125 factory team for KTM, for Chesterfield KTM, with two other Americans, Bobby Moore and Mike Healy. They're like, you got to take this guy. And the mechanic pled on his behalf, and they took him. And it was a good thing that they did, because Trampas Parker would go on to give them a world title in 1989. Parker also would back that up 2 years later in 1991 by winning the 250 world title. And by 1995, he went into the 500 class and nearly won a title there. It came down to the last moto of the last event. So happy birthday, Trampas Parker. Let me know what you guys think. Comment on what you think, and thanks.
Well, I did the Magoo Chandler benefit in 1986, and then I was full-time in 87, and that's when I wrenched for Phil. And then M. Robert, which was the clothing company back then that sponsored most of the top riders over there, bought me a 500 the week before the first round, and we went and did the 500 World Championship, at least a couple of rounds of it on a box stock KX 500.
Oh wow, yeah. So tell me this: how did you end up in your '89 season? How did the KTM ride come about?
That's a pretty funny one, because at the end of 1988, KTM didn't know that Puzar had signed with Suzuki yet, but they needed some bikes on the track at the Italian Championship. They just wanted a couple of extra KTM bikes on the track. And I really hadn't rode a 125 for probably close to 2 years at that time. And they gave me this stock bike to practice the week before the event. I went out and rode a couple of times, and I thought, man, I don't know how to ride a 125 anymore, because that thing was so slow. And when I showed up at this Italian Championship race, and there was about 7 of the top 10 from the World Championship there, they actually gave me one of Alex Puzar's practice bikes. And I can remember I jumped on it that morning in practice at the Italian Championship, and I went out and I made 2 laps, and I come back in, and I can remember telling the guy who ended up being my mechanic, Farrell, I said, it's over. He said, what do you mean it's over? I said, there ain't nobody that can beat me on this bike. And he looked at me and he laughed, and he goes, that's just a practice bike. I said, I don't care. I said, this is the fastest 125 I've ever rode. I said, I'll win every moto today, hands down. And he just kind of laughed about it. And then I went out and set qualifying on pole position with about 5 minutes to go. And I pulled back into the truck, and he goes, what are you doing? I said, I don't care where I start. I said, as long as I get top 10 on the gate pick, I said, like I said, I win all 3 motos today. And that's how it all started, man. And I ended up winning the first 2 motos, but he knew the bike wouldn't make it the third moto if I rode it wide open. And I told him, I said, I don't care if the bike breaks. I'm here to do my job. And I said, I've already proved that I can win on this bike. And he talked me into backing down. I let it for a while, and then he got out in the track and he started signaling me the bike ain't gonna make it. And I backed it down and got second the third moto. And he kept telling KTM, he said, I got the guy that can win y'all the championship next year. And they said, well, we've already got our factory riders lined up, Bobby Moore and Mike Healy. And I told him, I said, man, I don't want the factory bikes. I said, because we're limited on what we can do. I said, let's just take all last year's stuff. And that way we can use whatever suspension we want and make the bike fit the way I want it to ride. And that's what we did. We just used the 88 bikes and ended up winning the 89 championship.